Ready to go. Awesome. Well, welcome everyone to this panel. This is going to be a really interesting panel today because not only do I have this like brain trust of people that understand this stuff more than I do, but and probably many of you do. But we're going to focus this discussion not so much on the what is NFT and what is the impact of the technology and all that stuff from a technical type standpoint. We're going to look at it more from a creativity and monetization standpoint and what it can bring us in the future. And that's what I'm going to center this on. Because we have a bunch of panelists here, all these great guys, I want to do introductions. Normally when I do these panels, I like to just kind of stop at each person and have a short conversation with them as part of the introduction. But for this one, I'm going to do kind of a formal walkthrough of introduction so I can really quickly go through and make sure you know who we're talking to on this panel. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen real quick. Okay, so here we are. You guys are, if in case you were wondering where you were at, you're at the All-Star panel. I'm your host for this, Frederick Van Johnson. And we've got a number of panelists. I'm gonna run through them real quickly here and give you a little bit of background. First, me. I'm an ex-United States Air Force combat photojournalist. I'm now a professional photographer and entrepreneur. I'm a host of This Week in Photo, which is a podcast. And I also host a podcast for Skyloom Software Corporation called Behind the Scene. And I've been on the teams for companies that make products at Apple and Adobe and Yahoo and Google. And I've also served as chairman of the board at Brooks Institute of Photography. And I do some strategy and marketing for high-tech companies around Silicon Valley. Also on the panel here is Mr. Trey Ratclif. He's a writer, a public speaker. He's an artist and photographer. He blogs about traveling on his website, Stuck in Customs, and posts photographs there all the time. So make sure you check it out. In the early years of Trey's career, two photos that he created won the 4th annual photography contest at Smithsonian Magazine, and he's gone on to build a gigantic entity on the internet that's very authoritative with regard to photography and creativity. Next up is Matthew Jordan Smith. He's an American photographer. He's based in Tokyo, Japan, and he works between Tokyo, New York City, and Los Angeles, and has photographed some of the world's most famous people, including Oprah Winfrey, Queen Latifah, Angela Bassett, Tyra Banks, and more. And his advertising and clients include Olay, Pantene, Revlon, Showtime, and HBO. Next up is Maxim Jago. Maxim is a film director, a futurist, best-selling author, and director of the Creativity Conference. He's well known as a media technology trainer and presenter, and is the author of multiple books and literally thousands of tutorials. He's also directed 2 feature films and over 30 shorts, which have won Best Director, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor awards, and he's also an award-winning screenwriter. So people know what they're talking about on this panel. Also, Troy Plota. Plota is an award-winning professional fashion and advertising photographer for over 30 years. He's also the CEO and founder of Plotograph, and his patented Plotograph technique and social app animates still images and allows content creators to easily bring their static images to life. His app has gone on to #1 in Apple's App Store in the photo video category, and now his company is gearing up its NFT marketplace to help artists mint and monetize their work. And also on the panel is Evgeny Tchebotarev. Evgeny is the Chief Growth Officer at Skyloom Corporation. Prior to that, he founded 500px, a photo sharing marketplace which raised $25 million and was ultimately acquired. So that is your panel. These are the people that we're talking to today. And with that, we've got the introductions out of the way. Now we're going to dive in to this conversation. That was 7 minutes. I did all of that. I introduced all of you people in 7 minutes. It's good. So all that information, this is unprecedented. All right, let's dive in. Let's set the stage. So I'm going to make a couple of assumptions before we start this conversation. I'm going to make the assumption that people that are watching this are at least familiar with the concept of NFT and cryptocurrency and blockchain and all that. So I don't want to start and make this a 101 discussion. I want to make this more of a 201 discussion. So with that, I want to segue first into Mr. Trey Ratclif. Thank you for coming all the way up here for this virtually.
So, not that far. just a
You
Zoom
walk
call
from
away.
you walk from one side of the house to the other. I know. So this, we're the context of NFTs and creativity. Devil's advocate. When people look at this stuff, they're like, you know what? This cryptocurrency stuff. Do I really need to care about that? It's going up and down. Elon Musk is in and out. I don't know what it is. That I just not look at it right now and instead just continue to become a better artist? Or is, in your opinion, Trey, is this something that photographers absolutely need to be paying attention to right now?
Well, you should always pay attention to your craft. That's the most important thing. Like, produce work that's interesting to you. Like, that's by far the most important thing. And
Yeah.
then, after that, you could put on your money hat and then figure out how to make money off of it. Yes, NFTs are here to stay. There's enough people that believe in it, so that it will be a lasting token that will last forever. Um, yeah, I think, if you really look at the history of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, like, it's a fiction that only exists if enough people believe in it, which definitely is the case now. There's enough people that believe in it. And just like NFTs, there's enough people that believe in NFTs and they want to have like a visual store of their wealth. And if you're a creator and you have something unique that you've made, there's nothing wrong with sharing it. And then you have a direct connection with people that love your work. So there's no, I don't see any downside. It's all upside.
Yeah. And on that, Maxim, on the creativity side of it, the conversation often goes to, especially with cryptocurrency, it goes to the discussion around what is value, right? So what and how do you intrinsically assign value to something, especially something as ethereal as pixels, right? So in the world of NFT, right, the whole idea is, okay, it's basically a serial number stamp that says this is a Maxim Jago piece and it's therefore worth this much money. How do you reconcile that with the creators that are out there that are saying, hey, you know what if I don't have Maxim's name? What if I don't have Trey or Troy's or Evgeny's or Matthew's name? Does my stuff still have value? How do you chime in on that?
Wow. Well, I think the classic rule is that the value of anything is what people will pay for it. And if you look at a great parallel, I think, is when word processors first came, and everyone said it was the end of the publishing industry because now anyone could write a novel. And it turns out that writing a good novel is difficult. And so beautifully typeset, laid out text that is awfully written, still nobody wants to read it. And
Right.
I think that if you look at the ways in which people attribute value to artistic works, broadly speaking, there's kind of two principles, right? It's either a powerful, compelling piece of creative work that moves you, changes you, and you feel like you need it in your life, or it's some idea that is attributed a high value in our society. So you get an artist that's well known, or they're famous, or they're controversial, or they're just already famous because they're an actor or something like that. There's a value by association. And that's how the value system works. I don't think NFTs changed that. I think NFTs provide a vehicle by which works can be considered to be original and unique. So it's a kind of store of value in the same way that a painting is, if that painting has a certificate. But it doesn't really change the discussion about the value or worth of creative works.
Yeah, yeah, I 100% agree with that, and I see it. It's almost like, and Matthew, if you could chime in on this, I almost see it as two kind of camps, right? So there's the camp of all you guys, right? People that have established their names and they've sold companies and they have social followings and all that, and then there's everybody else. I put myself in the everybody else category. So the rest of us that don't have that but are interested in this NFT technology, is it, if you have a name and you have a following and you have the talent, of course, all this goes under the umbrella of having talent. But you have the talent, that's one thing, because now you can basically print money and sign it and sell it. But if you don't have that, where does the value of NFTs come in? Like,
I
is there any
think
value for the everyman?
absolutely. I think this is almost in a way a great equalizer. Of course, if you have a following, if you have a name, you're going to get attention. But I think also what this has shown already, you don't need that. If you just have great work and it's compelling to somebody, it doesn't need to be compelling to everybody. As a matter of fact, you shouldn't even worry about trying to compete with and bring in everybody. You just want to find your audience, and they're out there, and you show that work, and somebody's going to love it. That's the great thing about NFTs. Number one, you show that you are the original owner. You're the creator of this work, and that gets documented and put on the blockchain. That's wonderful. But if you have great work and nobody knows who you are, and they see it, and somebody connects with that work, they can become a collector. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So for everybody, famous or not, this is a great thing.
Yeah, and I want to dive into that a little bit. And Ev, I want to throw it over to you. So I know you're very enthusiastic about this space and doing stuff in it, and I'm interested from a there's a couple of questions that came up last night where I had a meeting in my community, and we're kind of talking about NFTs, and one of the questions that came up was the issue or the problem of fraud or derivative works and that sort of thing. So in other words, you have the stamp of NFT on a work, sure, it's stamped, and you have that in your house. Somebody takes a picture of it, they have it, right? They kind of have it, they can print it, but obviously it's not going to be worth the same thing as what the original, but does it matter? Can you reconcile that? How do you add value to something that's inherently copyable?
Absolutely. So first of all, this is very social question. It's very important that I can just go visit Trey's gallery, save his photo, and mint it as NFT, and it's gonna be hopefully as valuable as Trey's photos, with his check mark on it. So there's no real mechanism other than social policing today that allows to do that. Such mechanisms are possible to invent. There's algorithms and specific ML technologies that allow to do this, but it's not done yet. And none of the existing marketplaces actually even want to do this because it's just not the first order of priority. So speaking of that, there's a second question. What if a photographer goes and mints their NFTs on all of the marketplaces that are out there? There's probably over 30 right now. I'm actively tracking probably 15 or 16 as of today. And there's a lot of those, and some artists are basically minting this across all of the ecosystem. That is also on them. I think this is kind of like a social thing where you have to know your audience, right? You have to know who is buying this. Are they going to be buying every single one of those NFTs? Because at the end of the day, it's just a digital signature. That is the trust and the bond that you have between the creator that says this is edition of one, and not like edition of one, but on each of the marketplaces.
Right.
So it's the same as been existing in the print world, with signed editions, but now it's getting into digital. And so we have more proofs that this work exists only a copy of one. It's hard to track. It's being on blockchain doesn't mean that it's searchable with just a keystroke. You need to know the wallet address. You need to know transaction IDs. You need to have your investigative hat on to start tracking where transactions are going, who is buying, and some artists are buying their own NFTs. You can create your own wallet. So you have to kind of look a little bit deeper to see what's actually happening on the inside. But eventually marketplaces in the industry, because it's so new, will be solving those issues. And there's so many technical issues like royalties, for example. That's the biggest probably benefit to the photographers or artists who benefit, that the resale of their work, they're able to participate in appreciation of their work and get % of royalties back. The problem is that different marketplaces don't respect this today. There are standards that will be put in place. They're proposed in mid-2020, but they are currently not implemented, as far as I know, not at a single marketplace. So if you only resell at that particular marketplace, the photographer gets, or the artist get, the royalties. So again, lots of technical issues. I think we have to have the social part nailed down and the technical to make it work.
I love that. Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into Plota, because you are actively involved in building one of these marketplaces, right? So I want to understand that, and if you could put it in context for the everyman. So all that stuff that Ev just said, you know, I saw the Matrix flying at me when he was talking, right? So and you know, and arguably a lot of photographers have that issue, or creatives have that issue, where it's just this NFT and blockchain and cryptocurrency is just full of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And now you have these marketplaces. Which marketplace do I trust? And do I build my own? Or if I have an NFT on this one, and can I put it on that one? Yeah. Can you break it down for us from someone who's building a next generation marketplace? Make it simple for us, Plota. Tell us, break it down.
Okay, absolutely. So basically, we're actually watching what's going on, and of course, everybody's rushing to be first to market, but we're seeing a lot of people kind of making mistakes. And as Ev was talking about, these will be corrected for sure. So what we're seeing is happening is, we have all these artists going through all of your questions there. We have all these artists who've been building up a following, or they're really passionate about what it is that they're doing. And so now there's a way for them to monetize that throughout their whole career. Because as the NFTs keep reselling, they're getting profits from that. So the more NFTs they have registered, the more money they're going to make down the line. So what we're doing is we're actually setting up our social platform to coincide with what's happening with NFTs. So somebody could actually do a post and then decide whether they want to register that as an NFT through us. So some images will be registered, some won't, but we're also setting it up where you actually don't have to register it till it's sold. So that's the other thing that we're working on right now too. And the way that we're setting up our terms and conditions, it's setting up so, we don't want somebody who's going to try playing the system and putting images out on like 10 different places. And it's like they said, it's the same thing as though if somebody were to do a signed piece and say this is 1 of 10, and then they go do it again a couple years later, 1 of 10 or whatever it might be. So we're kind of like taking things a little slow because we want to make sure that we do it right. But just know, photographers are out there, content creators, this is a really big deal, and it's something that's really exciting. And all of the panelists here, we're all being very thoughtful in the way that we're kind of going through this to make sure that it's done in a way that artists are able to monetize.
Yeah. And Trey Ratclif, you were jumping on this boat early. I've been following you, and you've been posting about it. You've got shots up there. Take us through your decision process. Like, you had, obviously, when we see this technology, there's this epiphany moment of, holy crap, this is kind of interesting. Like, take us through your flow and how you decided to lean into it. I know what it is because you're always leaning into stuff in the canary in the coal mine, but on this one is a little bit different. Take us through that.
Yeah, I think my journey with NFTs started about 2 years ago when, this, Fred, I used to go give talks at Pinterest and Facebook and places like this. So actually, one of the founders of Facebook came out here 2 years ago to the little studio, and he was telling me about NFTs, non-fungible tokens. He said he's starting this new company called Maker's Place. I'm like, dude, I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. It's super weird. Like, I literally don't. I guess I understand the concept of art in the blockchain, but then he stayed here for another hour, explained it to him. I was like, yeah, okay, that sounds pretty good. Sounds like it could be big someday. So I just kind of waited. But then I launched on, I did 2 drops, one on Foundation and one on Maker's Place. And they both did like really well. So yeah, I'm not quite as early of an adopter as you think that I am, because I could have done it 2 years ago, but I just waited until there was enough people that believed in the system. I didn't really know, like, there's stories out there, right? And then people believe in one story versus another story. And the more people that believe in the NFT story, that becomes a thing. So my first one was on Foundation, and all that with charity, and did pretty well. And then I did another drop on Maker's Place. And I think people just, like, referring to what the earlier great panelist said, like, they just gotta have to believe in the artist, that we're not going to put the same thing everywhere, because that ruins our own our value that we create. So we're not going to put the same. Plus, if you're a photographer, like every one of the panelists is, we've got thousands of photos. Like, why would we put the same thing in every place? Yeah. So so those drops went pretty well, and I think we might drop on OpenSea pretty soon. I just did Burning Man photos for the first few, and those did well. So I don't really know. Like, hey, man, I'm figuring this out as I go along. You know, I've figured out a few things, and it seems to be going well. But I'll continue to. I think the idea is like just to go forward, be willing to make mistakes, iterate, try again, and not beat yourself up if you make a mistake here or there. So I think that's probably the most important thing, is just like getting out there, putting your stuff out there, and see what works, see what doesn't work. Yeah.
And how does that work, Trey? I know you've had gallery shows around the world, right? So the traditional gallery shows with prints hanging on walls, people coming in and buying and all that kind of thing. So how does the NFT technology or this mode affect that world? And does it all? And Matthew, it's coming to you next.
Sounds great.
I want your thoughts too. Yeah.
Well, I think it helps to build credibility. There are certain collectors now that I have with NFTs where they put like 4K versions up on their screens, and they may never buy a print because they're just like techie kind of people. So they like to have a 4K thing on some kind of rotation at home. It doesn't hurt the overall art business at all. In fact, it helps it. People don't like. Yeah, people do collect like traditional big prints of mine, but this doesn't diminish it. If anything, it adds value to the existing prints that are out there.
Love it. Matthew, you same thing, right? You've had prints hanging on walls all around the world, and presumably in celebrities' homes and all that. How does this digital only kind of thing, affect the print and the intrinsic value of having physical atoms that you can hang on the wall?
I think it helps it in a big way. I see it more than just being in the physical world. I think, right now we're all thinking about the physical, and with my NFTs, I'm using them to also give a physical portrait of that as well. If they buy the NFT, they'll get a physical print.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think a lot of people right now are caught up, oh, do they get anything physical? But I think really it's good if you look at them two different ways, the physical world and the metaverse. Right now, all we know is the physical world. But as we speak, people are buying land and buying things to go in that land. So imagine a digital gallery where you can put all your NFTs or the best NFTs in the world from a certain region. It just opens up to other possibilities, and that's super exciting. For me, what got me into the NFT, and I'm still very new into it, 3 weeks into it, and still haven't really figured out how to do the whole drop thing. Trey, I need to talk to you about that more. But it's so exciting because it gives an ability to show things that you couldn't show before, in the world we live in now. And that's what has me so excited. I can show work the way I've wanted to show it for a long time that I could not show as an NFT. And that's super exciting. I don't really care about, if it sells right now in this moment. It'd be great if it does, but I think long-term, this is gonna be a great thing to sell work in the future, to have it, maybe it'll even change copyright and fix the problems with copyright, possibly, who knows? It's just very exciting. And I see it as being a plus, physical prints and NFT, two separate things that have their own world.
Yeah, but they're just slightly overlapping. You hit on a topic, I think you and I talked about this offline, Matthew, just the idea of how NFTs might revolutionize, or like you said, fix the whole copyright issue. Maxim, I want to throw it to you first. So switching gears over to copyright. So from a layperson standpoint, photographer that's just looking at this, maybe they understand copyright. We've done shows on TWIP about copyright and how photographers should register their images and all that stuff. Do you see this from your standpoint as the next step or the next iteration? In other words, should photographers just be generating NFTs for everything they make just to prove that it's theirs, or should it only be those very special things? Like, how should we be thinking about it?
Really interesting question, and I'm probably just a couple of steps behind Matthew with my grasp of the mechanism of producing NFTs, but my understanding is that there's a cost associated with it. I think Troy mentioned that some platforms are developing the option to have that fee only when you've sold the work, and I think that's a really, really positive development. But the cost of protecting your copyright is a factor with physical things that you produce or any kind of digital content. I know from screenwriting, it's a major, major issue. I think the bottom line is that if you can perceive something, you can copy it. And so the DRM, the digital rights management efforts that you put in, you have to weigh that in the balance of the cost of encumbering your consumers and the people that are going to buy your works. I know of one company I worked with some years ago that decided to just pretend to have rights management because it was so much more expensive to actually have it. And they figured, it'll be okay if people copy it. I was really proud when I discovered people were pirating my stuff because I felt like I've arrived. But what this does do is, if you create an NFT, my understanding is that that's on the blockchain now, and you've got a kind of certainty behind the ownership or the authorship of that particular file, that particular item. Now, how you came to have that file, or where the original image came from, that's a whole other conversation. I think it helps. I think, as Matthew's been saying, this is an add-on, this is a benefit, but you're probably not going to completely replace existing copyright mechanisms. You're going to want to do both.
Yeah. And Troy, so Trey was talking about just we were talking about where do these things go. He's talking about, some of the people that buy these will be people that want digital now. They may not want a physical print. You got what I'm guessing is an NFT or something hanging on the wall behind you. Are you is that what you're seeing as you build out this part of your company? Is that who you're targeting? Those people that are going to just want to have something rotating in a digital picture frame, or just have the digital version versus the physical version? How do you see it?
Well, one of the things I've been working on for the past several years is motion art, where it is digital files rotating. I'm not really a big print guy for quite a long time now. I'm more of a commercial advertising photographer for years. I was sending out laptops instead of print books, actually 15, even 20 years ago. So clients would get the laptop because I love showing digitally. There's so many benefits for it now that digital displays have come down in price, there's so many ways of actually being able to show these. We're actually working right now also with a trading card company. And so they're taking their trading cards and minting them as NFTs. So what's cool about that is, let's say if you own a Babe Ruth trading card, and however many millions of dollars that would be worth, right? You have to keep that in your safety deposit box. You can't really show anybody, and it can't get damaged because it's physical, all these sort of things. But now when you purchase an NFT, it's safe. It's safe on the blockchain. You could show that wherever you want. You can show it on a big display behind you. You could, show it at work, whatever it might be, because you own that particular file. So it's really exciting. And once again, it's just for a way for artists to monetize. It's really fantastic.
Yeah, this whole conversation is fascinating. I've got a page of different directions that this could go in, and this is just one of them. Ev, yeah, I know you're like we said at the beginning, very hot on this space, and I'm curious from your perspective, especially I've been the founder of 500px, and now at Skyloom. So from a company that distributes already created work to one that's helping artists create stuff. When you look at the NFT space, a lot of people are like, myself included, are thinking, okay, is it a print? Should I a digital image? Is that my NFT? Is it a plotograph? Is that my NFT? Is it a video clip? I've heard Jack Dorsey doing tweets as NFTs. Can I NFT a thought? Like, what is an NFT, or what kind of things can you apply NFT to?
This is excellent question, and it's like a lightning round that I want to say. So first of all, there is thousands of different blockchains. So you can put your NFT anywhere in any of the blockchains, and good luck finding it later. It's like finding that in one of those drawers, where socks go. So most of the platforms actually mint this on Ethereum. That's where the gas fees, the fees that you have to pay to mint those, come into play. Just a few days ago, there was $300 or $400 to mint one NFT. It actually takes about the same to not sell NFT and to what's called burn it, in case if you don't want to keep it in your profile. So every single transaction has to have a cost. And that what makes it pretty expensive, because basically you're using a global computer to execute your specific tasks. There's a lot of interesting technologies that have been built to mitigate this. Some of the platforms that Roy mentioned are not actually minting on the blockchain when you post it. They're just putting it in the database, and they're executing what's called a smart contract only when there's a first bid, or even putting the bids specifically like in escrow or in some other way, or like signing this with the wallets, and then only executing when this transaction goes through. So everybody in the industry is trying to solve this. I've been trying to solve this in 2017 to help with copyright for photos. It didn't work then. It's not going to work now because the blockchain is just not built for massive throughput. And thousands of people are building technologies on what's called layer 2 to have roll-ups between like private blockchains onto what's basically like an open source blockchain on Ethereum, for example. Very difficult problem. Thousands of developers are working on this from 2014, still not solved. And by now the ETA to solve this is approximately 2 or 3 years, optimistically. That timeline constantly shifts, as well as Elon Musk's predictions on Tesla cars shipping. So the same goes for blockchains and NFTs in particular. But here's another thing. So NFTs in itself can be anything you want. And one thing is that it's basically a smart contract that you can make to do anything you want. So you can have not just a digital print, you can have a digital print that changes over time. You can have a digital print that burns itself if you resell it more than 2 or 3 times. You can have multiple digital prints that appear at different times of the day or the month or the year. Or it might transform into a new digital print, when the time or specific action passes. So you can actually make it into anything. And a lot of interesting digital artists are currently trying to experiment and make it go further. So this is just like day one for what's possible with them. I don't even want to think of them as just like, okay, I'm giving you a picture and it's additional one. I think that's what Matthew mentioned, is that we're living in like day 1 or day 0 of the metaverse, and some of those works will be transformed into something else. You can make your photo, and once it's put, once you basically include your wallet in some of the games like the Decentraland, it can become a butterfly in a way of a picture that's flying around the digital world because you programmed it to do so. So the possibilities are endless, and we're just scratching the surface of what's possible. So I'm very excited to see how that evolves in the future.
This is so cool. I had no idea you could do that, because now my brain is spinning. I'm thinking, wow, so could you do episodic NFTs where you create a photo that over time reveals a story?
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's
And they also can be programmatic in the sense that there's one work called Replicator by Mad Dog Jones. It actually has also a probability effect, so that it will mint specific number of works. It was sold for $4 million, but it can be anywhere between approximately 100 works that will come out of this to about 300 works, because the uncertainty was basically programmed into that NFT itself. And that's what makes it valuable and unique. You're basically able to interact with art the very first time in history, because usually the transaction is very simple. The artist makes something, you buy something. But now the act of buying can actually ignite series of action where you, as a buyer, also become co-creator of this. And I think from the artistic perspective, this is something that never been done before, and very, very interesting.
That is
If I may
crazy.
just pitch in for a second on
Yeah, go
this
ahead,
thing,
Maxim.
the smart contracts thing, we're at this tipping point with currency and socioeconomic models right now. And we're moving into this territory of blockchain, cryptocurrencies, any kind of tokenized payment. But this, and sovereign identity is a massive part of this as well, where all your data is secure. But the smart contracts are absolutely mind-blowing. It's a whole new way of business functioning. And especially when you're operating with any kind of cryptocurrency payment system, it's non-federally controlled. There's currency flying around in every direction. The whole thing's automated. There's no middleman. And it's a whole new, it's like three-dimensional chess for money. And as Ev was saying there, you know, you can have it do stuff, it transacts, it causes change in the world, and it's all automated. It's absolutely mind-boggling and fantastic.
You know, this. I want to play devil's advocate and throw this in there, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I'd be irresponsible if I didn't bring this part of the discussion up, and that's the ecological impact or environmental impact of NFTs on the world. That's been in the news, all that stuff. Just real quick, I want to get sort of a temperature of what we feel about that, right? And Troy, you came on in my group last night and kind of diffused it, and talked about how much it takes to mint certain cryptocurrencies versus what we're talking about here. But maybe you can take this because you explained it very eloquently last night. What environmental impact of this stuff is real quick? What are your thoughts on it?
Thank you. Yeah, so what we're doing is we're just doing everything we can to help artists monetize. So there are some impacts with the environment with this, but I think it's minimal for so far as what's going on between NFTs and what's actually going on with the regular blockchain with more business transactions. That's more where the problem probably lies. I'm really interested to hear what Ev has to say about this. Because I'm actually really interested in bringing Ev over to what we're doing. I mean, after listening to him here, it's really amazing.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Ev, what do you think? Do you? I mean, are you concerned about the environmental impact of the blockchain and cryptocurrencies and NFTs in particular?
Look, there's so many different opinions on this. I'll say this: when you print something, you have to ship it. And why is nobody thinking oh, I have to use canvas and this, and canvas is coming from one country, my inks is coming from another country, then I pack it and ship it, and this is basically in a way cleaner. The cryptographic process that's happening is really cool technically, because you're basically giving a hash of a secret jumble of things and telling the world, okay, now you have to guess what's inside. And the whole world is basically guessing randomly to figure out what it is. And when they unpack it, they're like, I figured the random string of numbers, so we know it's true, and they get the reward for this. So it is energy inefficient, that's for sure. And that's where the gas fees are basically, they more or less correspond to work plus the energy combined into this, and congestion of the network itself. A lot of different technologies will solve it in the sometime near future. There's a lot of fun things, layer 2 optimistic rollups. We can talk all day about this. There's whole conferences happening on how best to do this. Going from proof of work to proof of stake was a major achievement for Ethereum, and that's just the beginning. But long story short, the fees will become cheaper. The process will become more efficient. And so, when the world reopens, we all will be flying and we'll forget about the environmental impact. So I think that discussion is a bit short-sighted in that regard.
Yeah, I'm curious, how do we get to that point? How do we get to the point, and feel free anyone to jump in, Maxim, maybe you can start first, but how do we get to the point where NFTs are as commonplace as, say, an ATM transaction or something like that? Is it going to take a large entity to come in and just legitimize it, for lack of a better phrase, like an Apple or a Facebook or PayPal or someone like that to come in and start playing in the space, or will it naturally just sort of traject into that direction? Maxim, what do you think?
Well, I think you have it exactly. It will be some major player will, if you like, they'll ratify, they'll normalize the technology. and it'll be, I mean, you look at tablets, you know, or smartphones themselves, you know, once you've got a consumer level product that requires no training, no understanding, you just press the button and it does the thing. But for you to
Right.
get to that point, you know, I always think that major social change is a bit like a dawn over a mountain range, right? And I think we've spoken about this before, that just the peaks of the mountain get the thing first. That's the early adopters. And then as you get to the main part of the mountain, and it's a really major amount of change, and then there's some people that lag behind. But it's in that big part, and what Ev's describing is really important. You've got to establish the standards, and those standards have to be agreed to by all of the stakeholders. And when all the stakeholders say, oh, okay, then this is how we'll run the blockchain, this is how we'll do the minting, okay, we all agree on that, that's when a major entity or several major entities can come in and say, okay, here's your consumer level access product. And we're beginning to see that, for example, with cryptocurrencies. You're starting to see credit cards and banking emerging with, for example, Bitcoin in particular is being picked up, and sometimes Ethereum. And so you can now get a credit card where you can, with a credit card, primary currency is Ethereum, for example. But for that to happen, major banking and financial institutions have to sign off a bunch of stuff. The SEC has to agree a bunch of stuff. There has to be a whole legislative landscape, and it just takes time. I think Ev's timescale is about right. You know, I think probably 2-3 years we're going to start to see it'll just be an app.
I'm actually willing to strongly disagree with you.
Oh, great.
And Frederick, if I can jump in, but basically imagine for NPX of today, right? You have to create an account and upload all your works. And if RNPX decides to close its business, you actually, have no recourse. You have to go to Flickr, re-upload your photos once again, and start all over. What's happening with NFTs, with decentralized internet, is way more interesting. Again, this is in infancy phase. It's like it doesn't really work in reality today. But what's going to happen is that you have your wallet, you have your ID, like me is me. And I can go to Flickr, input my ID, and all my works are there. All the works that I purchased and all the works that I own. And you can have this marketplace regardless if I wanted to have on Flickr, on NPX, on Facebook, or anywhere else. So for big entities, that's actually a threat because Facebook gobbles all the data. But now the decentralized web is saying, no, we're gonna take it back. We're gonna put it on public computer, which is Ethereum, and basically you will control this. So you have your wallet, you have your ID, and whoever gives you the best service, you have your wallet. It's basically your assets. You can bring it to any vendor you want.
But do you not feel as a if we're talking about consumer level access to this stuff, it's still today, people are very nervous about, the general public pretty nervous about cryptocurrencies, tokenized payments. If we want a consumer level product, do you think that that's likely to come about unless there's some major influential player involved?
Absolutely. And I think that currency is very different from NFTs. In that sense, yes, big banks and Goldman Sachs and others supporting Bitcoin or starting trading Bitcoin is very important to normalizing this. NFTs are I would just treat them separately, even though it's like, yeah, they live on blockchain, but that's about it. Now we're talking about assets and not necessarily the money as the way of transfer wealth, but more about what do I own that's unique. And again, the NFTs are technically just basically like non-fungible tokens. So you do want to take them wherever you go as separate from Bitcoin specifically.
Yeah, so much to talk about. You know what? I'm going to move into the Q&A in just a second here. Before we do that, Mark Charette's in the chat, and he says, and boom, an EMP knocks out the power, and we're all just sitting here asking ourselves, what now? Do we care about, I mean, if an EMP hits whatever, we've probably got bigger problems than, my animated GIF. I can't get to it.
Life.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
EMP is always a game changer. Yeah, no one ever counts on the Spanish Inquisition or an EMP.
or anything. Guys, I want to get into the future. I want to talk about the future stuff. Before I get into this Q&A, Trey, I want to throw it back to you one last time. and Matthew, maybe you can chime in on this as well. Just the what does the future look like for you as an artist? In other words, are you betting heavily on NFTs and it's going to be an integral part of your future and that's the trajectory you see things, or is it more of, you know what, I'm going to plant a seed and we'll see if it grows. If not, we'll move on. Trey, how are you approaching this?
Yeah, I'm putting about 10 to 20% of my mind space into NFTs. And also I want to agree with what Evgeny said earlier about power and stuff like that. There's so many people on the internet that just they just kind of pull out the global warming card and they make you feel bad about like putting stuff on the blockchain, like, oh, you're a horrible person. You're just making the planet a more horrible place. That's not true. You're actually making it a better place, because like the old way of like shipping and crating and stuff, there's actual like fossil fuel cost in there. And yes, we may be generating some of this blockchain stuff with fossil fuel now, but it will go forward into solar or fusion or whatever happens, these natural dynamics of power production. So all these people that complain about the power consumption, this is it's a bit of a false god. But anyway, yeah, so I'm spending probably 10-20% of my time thinking about NFTs and what to launch and how to make them unique and how to make them collectible. Because, we are in a world where people do like to collect things. They like to buy things that are finite, whether it's land or physical gold or NFTs. And if you believe in the authenticity of the blockchain, like I do and like so many people do, then it's a worthy investment. And then you can have something that's unique and that's yours, and it's your thing that you can sell someday if you want to. So it has like a store of value, and in that way, it's almost even better than Bitcoin, because like even if you're just like buying and selling Bitcoin, it may go up 5% one day or down 5% the next day, but that's basically like trading the yen for the euro. Why not invest in art, and that art can go up like 20%, 50%, 3,000%. It's a much better store of your currency. And as soon as you cross the Rubicon to understand that currency is just a fictional story, why not put that fictional currency inside of an NFT? Because then you own something forever, as long as you believe in the blockchain. I can tell all the panelists believe in this stuff. It's clearly going in one direction and one direction only.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that we are moving into this really exciting place. Photography has been around almost 200 years now, and it's the time for it to evolve. And I think this is that evolution to see photography go to another place. I am extremely excited about it because, ideas I've had for a long time that I couldn't show in the photo world that we have today, or yesterday for that matter, I think that's changing. And I see the possibilities. Like the work that I have behind me, it doesn't fit in the traditional world. It does, however, fit as an NFT, and that's super exciting. If I have an image that's 14 meters long, how do you show that on a screen? But turning that into an NFT changes everything, and that's super exciting. And taking it outside as just being an image only, just being that moment caught in time. What about all the moments? We could put all those moments together and make it into something different than what we know as a photograph. So for, I think, this current generation who may be new to photography, it might give them ideas that we've never thought about. So it's exciting.
Yeah, it is. It is, guys. I want to segue into Q&A, and so folks, if you have a question, throw it into the Q&A real quick, and as we wrap this up. I told you this session was going to go fast, and we're at the end already. Wow. Although we'll go a little bit over if folks want to hang out and chat. Here's a question I want to throw at the grid here. Nicholas says, "Are there any legal issues involved in NFT rather than a copyright?" And what I piggyback on that is, NFTs. So if you can prove ownership of something that you've purchased and you've been infringed upon, somebody tried to steal it or something like that, is the technology, and Ev, maybe you could take this, is the NFT technology admissible in court? You know, does it play in that world, or is it just in our little backyard of high tech experimenting?
Excellent question, and there is actually a follow-up whether governments are needed to enforce copyright in like 50 years or so. And that's the ultimate answer, is that if you have a global computer where you can track everything that happens, whatever you input and what you decide to store there, what eventually is going to happen, and I'll make a futuristic prediction. I'm not Maxim, but I'll try my best, that within 5 or 10 years, every single valuable transaction will be an NFT. Even if it happens in physical world, you go buy a car, it will have an NFT record on the blockchain. You can see who bought it, who sold it, who went to repair this car, et cetera, et cetera. The same is going to happen to artworks, to houses, to other property, because that's the best way to store it and not rely on an efficient government. Again, there's not a single efficient government, even though we're spanning so many different nations on this call. And it's just not going to be a function of the government to do so. It's just going to be part of that, massive blockchain, whether it's going to be Ethereum or part of the global government that's created another one that's, again, public and open sourced, that will be seen. But that's what's going to happen. And so all the photos that you care about, all the artwork that you care about, will have this record onto the blockchain.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Nicholas, I hope that answers your question. The next question up is from Richard. Richard says, this is another copyright question. Could copyrights be removed after 50 years, as is currently the system? Put another way, could NFT ownership expire? I suppose you could make it expire if you wanted to, Ev, based on what you were saying before. You have pretty much complete flexibility with a smart contract, right?
The copyright laws are made by humans. Humans change them. Like when Disney's copyright were expiring, I think the US changed the copyright law. So when it suits the big businesses change this. So in my view, the question is acceptable in court is exactly the same question. It's humans who designed the system. The system is currently inefficient. There's a better system on the way. Let's embrace it. End of story.
Yeah, love it. Mark Surette's in the Q&A, and he says, I see how NFTs are essentially the new necessary for ultra large or digital only work. So what does it mean about the shift in the type of content creation that will have longer term appeal? So if I'm getting that right, he's saying, I don't know. Troy, you want to take that? Troy Plota?
Absolutely. So here's one of the things about it. So the NFTs are presented on digital screens. So this is what's interesting about photography, is presenting for like almost 200 years now. We've mostly been, stuck with prints, whether it's a black and white print, color print, or for color print. So now we have digital displays. It doesn't need to be stationary. So that's one of the things that we're working on, is like, whether it's a part, just a small part of the image moving or the whole thing, it's more interesting. And what we found is images that are actually served up as motion art, even if they started as a still, moving a certain part of it is just kind of a little more interesting. And we found actually sell better. We also are working on a technology too, where we're actually watermarking through pixel shifting. So not only is it going to be set up on the blockchain, but if somebody goes to copy it, we actually can go in and see what pixels are shifting, even though it's not detectable to the eye initially. So moving images are, I think, the part of the future, and I think photographers really should embrace that. I think it's exciting too, because like we're not stuck with just a stationary item. And NFTs really, I'm seeing a lot of photographers actually putting different processes on their images to get them to register them as MP4s instead of JPEGs.
Yeah. And that's a good question, Maxim. You're a filmmaker and you do all tutorials, all that kind of stuff. Do you, like, putting on your filmmaker hat versus your still photographer hat, do you see an impact in that space, in the filmmaking space from NFT?
Massively. I mean, I actually think what Ev said about everything is going to end up being logged somehow. And what we're seeing here is this transition from sovereign nations, boundaries, and unified single sources of power towards a kind of global collective intelligence supported by this universal technology. And it makes absolute sense for everything to have some kind of at least parallel existence in this territory, whether you call it an NFT or something else, or it's a new technology, whatever it is. It makes great sense for us to be able to say to the Star Trek computer, hey, what happened on June the 25th? And, what did that person say? And then the computer's just logging everything. And we're looking at solutions to the storage challenges that represents. But as a filmmaker, I mean, just the fact that you can embed royalties into the smart contract for the content that you produce is huge. It's famous, particularly for independent filmmakers, that you give your work over to a sales agent and then goes to the distributor and everyone takes a piece of the pie. And the piece that's left for you is this tiny little part of the revenue that comes in. To be able to control that is really powerful. But I'm also thinking that, I'm primarily set up to be a feature film director, worked on a lot of shorts, but I've got tons and tons of photography sitting around, but I also have tons and tons of 20, 25, 30-second video clips sitting around where I've just seen something that's moving, to Troy's point, and it's beautiful. And to my eyes, it's kind of ideal for an NFT. And I think we'll find many, 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 particularly independent filmmakers, there's a whole new revenue stream for them. And as we're seeing with things like social media and influencers, you get 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 followers. Now you can start to pay the rent with what you're doing online. I think we can begin to see a new revenue stream once we resolve this minting cost issue. It's fantastic for filmmakers.
Yeah, and Maxim, just to continue on that, one of the things, since you're a futurist, so maybe you could take this. So looking at some of the future-facing technologies like deep fakes, and authenticity in journalism, in those sorts of things, beyond just creativity, but using these sorts of NFT and blockchain technologies to say what you're looking at is real. Are we going to see that in the future?
Yeah, I mean, people are working on these technologies right now, and it's really crucial. I know, for example, a few years back, Adobe developed a technology that they decided not to release. I think it was called vocoder, I think. And you needed one sentence of a person's speech to mimic their voice and have them say absolutely anything. And Adobe felt it's just too dangerous. We can't put that out. But of course, other people did. They developed the technology, and you can now use it. The one issue with the authenticity thing is, again, I think Ev mentioned that the blockchain is pretty slow. And so we need ways of rounding up bunches of technology and just putting one certificate somewhere on the blockchain, because it's just too slow for our purposes. But I heard ages ago, for example, about the idea of attributing a certificate to every pixel in the chip when the camera is recording the original video. So every pixel of every frame, and then you can track those pixel certificates through to the display. And you can say that there's an acceptable amount of change. So you could, for example, you could do color correction, but you're not changing the contents of the image, and that's all tracked. It's just an enormous amount of data, an enormous amount of processing, but we'll get there. And I think that these sorts of, it depends on the content, for news gathering, that kind of stuff, it's just too fast. But for creative works, yeah, I think we can begin to use this technology to show the provenance and that kind of thing.
It's so interesting. And folks, we're at the top of the hour. I'm gonna continue the conversation. So folks that need to bail, we promised an hour, but this is a riveting conversation. So if the panelists have to go because you have other important things to go to, I understand, but we're gonna keep talking for a little bit longer as we dive through this and answer a couple of more questions. But this is riveting, and just the idea, Maxim, and everyone on the panel, as we look towards the future. So clearly we're all learning. Some of us are further along on the path than others, and deeper than others, have larger audiences than others, and different capabilities, etc. But looking in the future and kind of reading the tea leaves, looking at companies like Apple that have said that they're investing heavily in augmented reality type technologies, and we know Google is and Facebook is as well. When I look at that and I'm reading an article about that, then I switch and I read an article about NFT. I'm putting the chocolate and the peanut butter together, and I'm saying, how come I can't have something that lives in an AR world that's locked down to a physical location and NFT certified and all that? Are we going to see that, Ev? Do you think is that a future? Or am I just living in Star Trek?
I think you're living in Star Trek, but
I like it here.
Here's an idea that a lot of game developers are working on. And that is, you go to a marketplace and you buy a sword or an armor, right? And then you buy it with real money from a real, we had swordsmith before, and now they're gone because, except for Japan, I guess. But now there's virtual, swordsmith that they can make those virtual swords. The key that NFT is enabling is that, again, a lot of developers are working on this, that you can take it to Fortnite and have your sword there. Then you log out of Fortnite and go somewhere else in another game, and you still have your sword with you because it accepted across all of the universe of the different apps. And that is basically what the companies are working on. Gucci is putting their virtual sneakers that you can take into the game. Again, a lot of us are spending so much time in this box that it starts to make sense to buy virtual clothing, because you're freaking spending more time in virtual reality, even if it's Zoom, compared to outside world. So people will undoubtedly be spending more time on virtual houses. There's a house that was sold about for the price of a real house, but in the virtual world, by a Toronto artist. And that's just the beginning. People want to go somewhere away from the reality. And so, VR, AR, and games and everything else will enable us. And in the real world, we might be wearing like old sneakers because we have our fancy sneakers only in the game. Same for photos, same for art. Why do we go to Louvre in Paris? Well, because freaking Mona Lisa is there, right?
Yeah.
That's it. That's the only purpose, to freaking fly the plane across the ocean, wait in line, look at this tiny art behind like bulletproof glass. It doesn't make sense. Look at it at home, look at it on Google, it's free, but still people go there. And so they will go to those NFT museums, those virtual galleries, because the scarcity and uniqueness of those artworks will be exactly the same as going to Louvre and seeing the real Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
No, it's really exciting, because it's like, all that is really an experience. You go to the Louvre for an experience to see the real Mona Lisa. Same thing with this. I mean, you go with an NFT, you can give an experience in a new way that you couldn't do before. And that's what's super exciting.
Hey, can I add something? Mona Lisa became famous because it was stolen. 100 years ago, it was stolen. It was big news. Nobody cared about Mona Lisa before it got stolen. It was just national news for many weeks, and that's it. But now we forgot about this. We just go there because people told us to go there.
But apparently, there's one of the reasons the Mona Lisa is so famous is because the nonverbal signals are incoherent in the picture. So her eyes and her mouth are doing two different things, and that's enigmatic. And so it might actually be that it was kind of an error of judgment by the artist, but they thought, well, it's done anyway. And then of course it turns out to be mysterious. What's she really feeling? I'd like to mention just something you said there, Frederick, about augmented reality and XR. I think the future is all about AR. I think mixed reality is fantastic. It's really, really interesting, but it's more like an installation experience thing. I think the consumer experience, maybe, let's say 10 to 15 years from now, I think the norm for very many consumer experiences will be that you'll slip on whatever the thing is, very lightweight glasses that using, there's a number of really interesting like carbon nanotube lens systems that for displays, and all of that's coming. And then wherever you go, there is an opportunity, I think, for things like NFTs, because you could go to, for example, Imagine you go to a gallery and it's just blank walls. And depending on the gallery showing you choose to view, you can physically walk around an environment and just see different works. And like one of those silent discos, I don't know if you've ever tried
Oh
one of
yeah.
those, but you can just, you can say, okay, we're going to look at the Van Gogh stuff, right? Okay, so we're all going to look at Van Gogh, and you're physically standing there with people sharing the experience, and it's merging the digital world in a way. And Matthew mentioned, it's really important. The whole metaverse concept is crucial, and Ev was just mentioning what I would call the sovereign identity thing, where you're controlling your data and bringing it from one place to another. It's fascinating and so important. But I think for consumer experiences, it's all about AR. That's where it's going to be.
All this stuff is fantastic, and I'm a fan. I'm a huge fan of forward facing technologies, and even current technologies and things that we can do today that we couldn't do just a year ago. I'm wondering though, when I travel to, countries that aren't as well off as say the United States, are these kinds of technologies, and even the conversation that we're having right now, are they locked down to wealthy nations? Or in other words, are we going to see this kind of technology proliferate into third world countries or Vietnam or places like that? What do you guys think? Matthew, what do you think? You can take it first.
That's interesting. I think in time it will be everywhere. In 5 years from now, we are going so fast in technology now. We think where we were 25 years ago, it feels like we're going so much faster now. The next 5 years may feel like the last 25. Who knows? I love going to places like Vietnam and Southeast Asia, those third world countries. Will they keep up with this? I think so, and eventually, for sure. Yeah, maybe not as fast as the first world countries, but it will, I think, slowly trickle down everywhere. But we'll still need those other places to go to and have this experience and come back and get this.
Yeah. Troy, how do you see that? How do you see that? So the whole idea of proliferation throughout the globe, regardless of, country standing.
It definitely will, because it's cheap enough to present. So, displays have come down a lot, with price and that sort of thing. Technology is a lot cheaper too. So, a part of that, what's really exciting is these other third world nations, these artists that are there in these countries are now able to compete in a worldwide market and actually make the money that they could never see within those countries.
That's
so
true.
there's no doubt, like, even if you look on Instagram and go through our followers, we have so many people in Indonesia who are followers of ours on Instagram. So, and there's a lot of amazing artists there. So now they get to monetize. They get people from, whether it's the United States or the more wealthy countries, purchasing their art, but they're making the money as though it doesn't matter where they are. So it's really exciting. So now artists up to this point have really had a tough time with this, especially with social media, what's been going on and with Instagram and Facebook for years, as far as like these big tech companies printing billions of dollars off the backs of the artists, setting the algorithms, come on, post, create, while they're just printing money. Now these artists actually have art to sell, and all of these followers that they've built up throughout the years, now they can monetize that. And it is important for them, even as a business person, to have that following to make sure that they're kind of keeping up with that. So it doesn't matter where you are in the globe. And then those artists, no matter where you're going to be, you'll be able to present those NFTs or digital art wherever you are.
Yeah, so good. Trey Ratclif posted a link in the chat to one of the things he's working on. So click on that and look at that, folks. And Trey, I want to throw this question at you, and it's from where'd it go? It's in there now. It's gone. But it was a question about taxation and how that applies to NFT. Is this, are we still too early to care about that, or how does that work?
Dude, listen, with the blockchain, when it comes to IP and taxation, it's the Wild West. Believe me, I've been talking to my accountants. They have no idea what the blockchain is. They're very confused about like, how much money do you make? How do you transfer it into US dollars? Do you leave it in your Ethereum wallet? Like, how do we tax this? Same thing with IP, like who owns what? Like even these things that I published from Burning Man claims to own them, but I say, no, they're actually my creations. So actually, it's wild out there. But I think the more important thing is to understand like the true basis of it, which I think Evgeny was getting to, is like, we are creators, we create stuff, and we have a direct connection with people that buy it, and it's out there in the blockchain. And if they believe in us and they buy it, then it becomes a trusted transaction, and that lasts forever. So yeah, there's going to be taxes, of course. Happy to pay taxes. It's a little confusing to track because after someone buys something, it could be resold, and like it's wild out there. So like, just another reason I'm glad I'm not an accountant.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Actually, HMRC was really.
Go ahead, Max.
HMRC in the UK was super hard on this. They did not delay. They treat all that stuff like capital assets, and all they want to know is, what did you pay and how much did you get? We'll have tax on that, please. You can look on the UK government website today. They've got a whole breakdown, but basically they don't really care how you get your money. They just want to know how much it is, and they want their tax. So yeah, they treat it like a capital asset.
And I'm looking at this page you posted, Trey Ratclif, dreaming at dust. $2 million, 500 Ethereum. That like, see, it's those numbers like that get photographers like, well, I want to do that, but I'm no Trey Ratclif. How do I get a fraction of that kind of traction on an NFT that I mint? So,
that was not mine. It's just an example of how.
Oh, that's not yours?
Crazy
I thought that was
are.
yours. Okay.
No, it's not. No, I would do something much better, and it would be much less valuable. But yeah, no, so stuff goes crazy out there, and I think that it's an important thing for people to realize, like photographers that are watching this, that they see other people out there that are making like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. They think like, oh, like I should be doing that too. No, you're only hearing the rare stories. This is only like, in the bell curve, you're only hearing the 1% of the most exceptional sales. So like everyone's not out there. We're learning as we go. Like, as all of us on the panel, we're learning as we go. So I don't want people to feel like, oh, they're missing the boat. Everyone else is making millions of dollars, but not me. That's just not the case. This is early days. And as long as you're just listening to this, you're well ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I love that.
True.
Oh, go ahead, Matthew.
Now, so there's one question about governments, blocking, and right now I think there's this whole thing about China, in terms of like, Bitcoin and all that stuff. But the world keeps going and it hasn't slowed. So I don't think, what a government does is going to slow this at all. It's like a big, snowball coming down a mountain. You can't stop it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the questions that came up in a conversation I was having a while ago was about I'm in California, so like the California gold rush, and the people that got rich during the California gold rush were the first people that were in, and then the big winners were the people that were selling the axes and the blue jeans and whiskey
More
and
so.
all that stuff, right? Are we going to see that? Is that similar? The people like Troy Plota, you're building an infrastructure for this stuff. Is this part of that? You're building a Western town to service the miners that are going to go up looking for gold?
It's so funny that you say that. I actually use that as a reference. And you and I have not talked about that, but a lot of the time, I mean, back in the day, a lot of the people who made the money were the people who service people going in. So, but for me, I'm like, this is an opportunity for us to actually do it in a way that helps the artist. Once again, I keep saying that this the whole time. That's basically my focus, is because there's a way of doing it where the artists who have already created all these really great works are able to now monetize it. So that's that. I mean, of course, as a businessman, that's what I'm looking at is a great way to, bring photograph into the forefront and to kind of like bring it back away from these, the Facebooks and the Instagrams of the world, who I find are just unfairly taking advantage of artists. So, we have always prided ourselves, from the very beginning, you've been with us from the very beginning, we were founded by artists for artists. And what Ev created with 500px too, it's amazing. Now, Ev, can you imagine, like, back in the day, artists going and posting their images and being able to then register them as NFTs and sell, and because it's different than stock. So this is the other thing is, we were gearing up years ago for stock. We actually stopped because stock has become almost very low value. Unfortunately, it's really, photographers have taken a lot of hits in the past 15 years. So this is just, once again, a saving grace for artists and content creators and photographers specifically. A lot of photographers too need to understand that technology is really important, because what I found through this past several years is photographers are a lot of times behind the curve as far as understanding technology and wanting to be a part of it. But it's time to kind of step up and understand that, like, it goes hand in hand with creating that image. It's just a part of the business.
Yeah. So if people that are in this, we'll get back into the questions in just a second, folks that are watching. But if photographers are watching and they're in analysis paralysis mode, right? So they're not a Trey Ratclif who just jumps with reckless abandon off cliffs all the time and somehow succeeds. So if somebody is stuck in analysis paralysis, they're reading this one day and one day they're excited about it, the next day they hear, well, this crypto thing and Elon Musk did this, so I'm no longer interested in it. How do they get off the chair and start moving forward into actually doing something without, kind of losing their shirt or their house or anything? Ev, you want to take that?
Can I ask a show of hands? How many of you have any amount of Bitcoin, even a fractional amount, on the panel here? So all 6. Here's the thing. There is only 1.2% on the very optimistic analysis. 1.2% of people in the world have any kind of Bitcoin as a part of their wealth.
Oh.
1.2. We heard about Bitcoin in 2009. If you are a geek, you heard in 2013. If you are like in the tech, you heard about the bubble in 2017. You heard it again in 2020. And yet we're only optimistically at 1.2% people who actually jumped, in some way, and pessimistically or more realistically at 0.6% of the global population. So NFT is the same as Bitcoin in approximately 2013. It will take about 8 years for maybe 1 or 2% of the artists to mint their first NFT, and approximately the same for the collectors to come along as well. So
I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I think it's going to go a lot faster, actually, because we're already kind of well into this, like you're saying, 10 years into it. So I think that, what is it, the golden circle? You have that first to market.
I'll correct myself. You're right. Because Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are bringing more and more attention, I think the next curve will be faster. So fingers crossed for that.
But I think putting aside firm dates, because it's particularly difficult with this kind of technology to forecast dates for things to emerge. I think what you're highlighting is really important, Ev, that I've worked with technology companies for over 20 years, consulting in one way or another, and you have this, it's a particular kind of bubble that you think everyone cares about what you're working on. And there's this kind of presumption, the famous animated paperclip in Microsoft Word is a great example, that some team worked on this thing and they thought, oh, everyone's going to want this because it's so cool. And everyone, well, not everyone, some people weren't so crazy about it. We're within this relatively small group of people who are really, we're on the bleeding edge of this kind of technology. And I just love it. This kind of conversation for me is a kind of heaven. But the vast majority of people, like, a couple of people have mentioned wallets in this call. And we all know that in this context, we're talking about a very specific thing that has a very particular function. But for, as you just demonstrated, literally 99% of the people in the world, they think they mean the thing in your pocket. And so this is why, to go back to my comment earlier about, the big players need to come on board before we start to see a major consumer level access to this technology. It's not an issue with the establishment of a stable technology. That's already in hand. That's already happening. It's the educational component of this that people have to learn how it works and understand it and not fear it. And they've got to be able to access it as easily as hitting print on a computer. And my mother, it comes up a lot when I'm speaking on stage because she's super smart, Genius IQ, Mensa member, speaks 4 languages, but could not get to grips with printing on her computer. And so I think we need to be realistic about the numbers, but 1% of the
It's
world is a
not
lot
that
of people.
hard. But Maxim, it's not that hard because like how many people post on Instagram or Facebook? It's close to being as simple as that. They're already used to doing this. Right now, there's a few more check boxes, to hit, and then you're minting. So it's not that hard, but it's our job to kind of get the data out there, and then to have, of course, those success stories of people monetizing and making money, and it's exciting. But you guys are right though, as far as like we're on that bleeding edge, and we think that everybody knows what we know. And I would talk to people about NFTs, and they go, "What the hell are you talking about?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, let me explain." But a lot of people are saying, "Oh, okay, I've heard of that." But the younger generations coming up, they're very fast to learn this stuff, and I think that they're going to be a big part of this.
Well,
And again, 1% is a lot.
I will agree with both of you, futurist, and I will say that, like, I think that what's going to happen is it's going to be abstracted from the general public. They won't know if they're using a MetaMask wallet or Ethereum or Bitcoin. Just like there's millions of dollars flowing into NBA Top Shots, like people are just using their credit cards. That's what we did on Maker's Place. Like they have no idea that there's actually like blockchain stuff happening in the background, because I don't. This will sound very mean. I don't mean it to sound mean, but like most people are really dumb, and they won't go through the practice of like figuring out what the blockchain is or installing a wallet or whatever, but they will use a credit card. And as long as it's abstracted from them, and they believe that they own something, they believe they own in this, like, whatever, Michael Jordan dunk shot or whatever, like, then they believe in it. So I think everything will be abstracted, and there's going to be like, I think the future is clearly the blockchain, but I think that most people will just kind of limp into it, assuming that the way they've already like done their finances will be the way they continue to do their finances. So there's going to be like, that's what I think is going to happen. But like, it's clearly going this direction.
It's going to take someone like a Chase Bank or Wells Fargo or someone like that, so that next time I go to an ATM, I have another selection in the menu, and it's abstracted at that level, so I can take money from here and put it over there, and now I have money in my wallet that I can go buy.
But
NFT.
yeah, Frederick, here's an example. I do have a bit of Ethereum and Bitcoin. They're stored inside the bank. The company that I hired for that is actually storing that, on the airtight computers that never been connected and never will be connected to the internet inside the actual bank vault. So, kind of like abstracting this, there will be Chase that will say, we'll keep your NFTs safe. And you can select an option for $10 from your checking account, and they'll keep it safe for you. Just bring them the transaction IDs and bring your, MetaMask password and seed phrase.
See, that's the whole thing, though, right? That's the whole thing, though. So part of the allure of these technologies, blockchain and cryptocurrencies, is the decentralized banking aspect of it, and getting away from the Chases and the Wells Fargo and having autonomy with it. And now we're saying that we need them to legitimize this technology in order for it to take off and go mainstream. I mean, is there a way to have our cake and eat it too?
But it has to be both, right? You'll have people that are doing things independently and separate from all the banking system. But I just want to take a moment to take my hat off to Ev for implementing an air gap security system. That's old school and powerful, and it's the way to go. But like I said, it has to be a big button on screen that says "Make it okay." Just like Trey's saying, it's got to be, and trust is crucial. So you need some big brand names on there. If it says Chase Bank, click here to make it okay. Great, and it'll all be taking. It's on a blockchain. Okay, does it have a little icon of a padlock in the corner of the screen that's in green? Oh, good. I'll click on the make it okay button. And many years ago, I paid my way through film school doing tech support for Microsoft. And there was this thing that went around the call center that individuals, they read instruction manuals, they make careful choices based on reflection, based on the available data, and the public are a bunch of idiots. And the reason is we have an evolutionary predisposition towards pre-digested thinking. It's really good for us to just copy what a bunch of other people did. It really is efficient and usually keeps us alive. And that's with the power of testimonials, the power of modern marketing. So if we can develop these technologies in such a way that a person can trust that if they just click the make it okay button, it really is okay, now we have consumer level adoption of the technology.
Well, we're at the end of this. We're going to wrap this up. I'm going to hand the keys and the microphone back over to the conference organizers. But before I do that, I want to take one last question. It's from Lori Valance. And Lori, this is a perfect question to bring us home with. Where did NFT come from? Like we've got crypto. We've got, we've seen all these different flavors of crypto, Ethereum, Bitcoin, etc. This NFT thing, where did NFT kind of sprout up from?
Yeah, that's like a perfect question for me. So, first of all, there was Bitcoin as a first blockchain that came in 2009. And after that, people were trying to figure out what's going to be the future of that. So they came with a lot of alternative blockchain. Then a guy, a Russian Canadian living in the same city as I am, decided to start a new project that he called Ethereum. And basically that's another blockchain, but it's different from Bitcoin because you can program it. So anyone can put a specific, that's what's now called a smart contract, onto Ethereum and make it work. And it has a lot of tons of uses. You can use it for financial transaction. You can use it for buying houses. You can use it for hedging contracts. Basically, anything that can be programmed can actually live in a decentralized way. So you don't have to trust Chase Bank. And that's kind of like, this is the chicken and an egg. And you don't have to do all of kind of things. And so when Ethereum launched in 2015, or depending like when you count that as a pre-sale or as a first actual application on that, that became what's called basically global decentralized computer. You can submit your code and it will live on the blockchain. And so people started, because it's open source, people started giving suggestions to how to make it better. And then in 2016, a team also in Canada that was building different products out of Vancouver decided to implement a new suggestion, basically a new protocol. That's what's currently called ERC 721. They called it, it's still called ERC 721, but they gave it a name NFT, non-fungible token. Because fungible tokens is something that you can exchange with equal value. Money is one of those things. Books in the bookshelf, if they're all the same, is another thing. But my mom is an NFT. There's only one of those. I really care about that person. Maybe I can put her on blockchain, I'll see. But there's a lot of value. There's infinite amount of value for that. And so they came out with this and actually built the very first NFT project that were CryptoKitties. And CryptoKitties were famous because they completely hogged Ethereum, and the price spiked and the gas fee spiked. And that how ERC 721 was born. It's now the standard for all of the different smart contracts that a lot of marketplaces use. The problem is that it's standardized in theory, but in nature, everybody's writing their own code, which is not necessarily compatible between marketplaces. So when we talk about royalties that photographers or artists can make on a resale, that only exists currently on the marketplaces where the work was minted. So that's another proposal has been put in place in 2020 to standardize all of this. And it's still kind of like trying to control the chaos, because again, it's open source. You can do whatever you want. You can put any code, just pay the fees and post whatever you want. So a lot of work will have to be done, but I think the future is pretty bright, because a lot of smart people realize that the standards have to happen, that interoperability between different marketplaces has to happen. So probably this year or next year, there will be a lot of work done in this regard to actually make it easier for creators to get payments for their work, and if it's resold, to actually have the the upside from this resales as well.
Love that. And that's what Troy Plota, that's something you're working on over there, or down there in Maui, right?
Yep.
Let's wrap this up, folks. There's an after party happening, so I want to invite you guys into a breakout room over there if you guys want to come and hang out and drink and be merry over there. We could chat about that. But I want to do round robin real quick to give each one of you a chance to tell folks where they can go to keep up with you and maybe continue the conversation outside of this Zoom room about NFTs type stuff. Ev, why don't you take it first? Where can people keep up with you at?
Yeah, so currently, if you have a Ethereum wallet, it's usually a very complex string of numbers. Mine is actually a bit simpler. It's my last name .eth. So if you have some ETH, you can send it over. I can post it publicly. Yeah. So Frederick, I'm waiting for some of that.
You got it.
But yeah, so I'm pretty active on Twitter, same as my last name. So it's if you want to engage in conversation, that's the best place to be. Or if you're looking for the photo editor that's infused with a lot of AI. So I work at Skylum and we make Luminar AI as well.
Excellent. Perfect. Maxim, what about you, man? People want to plug into you. Where should they go?
Well, I have such a weird name. I'm technically a Google whack. So if you Google Maxim Jago, you'll just get me and some pirated stuff of mine. I'm at Maxim Jago for all the social media sites. I'm maximjago.com, and you can find me very easily that way. And also check out the creativityconference.is. That I'm hosting. That's coming up in August. Those are probably the two main things to check out.
Excellent. All right. Matthew Jordan Smith, what about you?
When it comes to NFTs, you can find me being very active on Twitter, where everybody who's active on NFTs is basically. And that's under Matthew _Jordan S. I couldn't put all of Matthew Jordan Smith on Twitter at the time. So Matthew _Jordan S. You can also find me on Instagram under Matthew Jordan Smith.
Perfect. Troy Plota, what about you?
Okay, Photograph app on iOS. We just actually had our update this morning. Pretty excited about that. Thank you. Yeah, and my username there is @TroyChristopherPlota. But yeah, so check out the Photograph app, and then on desktop, it's @plotaverse.com.
Excellent. And last but not least, Trey Ratclif, I'm going to let you bring us home, man. Where can people go to see stuff that you're working on, and any final thoughts on this whole space that seems to be cracking wide open?
Hey, panel, this is what rock bottom feels like. And I'll see you guys in the after party. And I'm about to do some New Zealand pot to get super high for the after party. You guys can join me. But if anyone else wants to follow me on social media, just look for me, Trey Ratclif. I am easy to Google and easy to find. And yeah, I'll take you guys on this wild NFT tour with me and Fred and all the other panelists. Anyway, that's the end. Welcome to Rock Bottom. See you in the after party.
Love it. We are at rock bottom. And with that, thank you. Trey, we'll let you get to that New Zealand pot. So
I'm getting in there. I'm going strong.
Great. Thank you, everybody.